Beneath the fog-thick moors of North Yorkshire, where the peat swallows sound and time, stands the scorched bell tower of Witherbridge Chapel, abandoned since 1931. That year, as dusk fell on All Souls' Eve, 7 villagers vanished no bodies, no storm, just a final toll from the chapel's iron bell, rung by no one. Inside, buried beneath pews, splintered by claw marks, police found a child's bonnet threaded with human hair and communion wafers. The diocese declared it mass hysteria. The case was sealed unsuitable for ecclesiastical review until 2090. I've obtained the original coroner's photos. Comment your country. If you're brave enough to hear what they buried in sacred ground, the birds had not come back. Not in all the years since the fire. Ellen noticed it first, not with her ears, but in her ribs, the absence of flutter. The stillness in the rafters, where even dust had gone quiet. She paused beneath the blackened beams of the chapel, fingers tucked in the pocket of her canvas coat, and looked upward. The ceiling, once painted with choirs, had melted into char, angels with eyeless sockets, flutes that opened into ashdot. She didn't believe in ghosts, not the kind that walked, but there were other hauntings, ones you stepped into, ones you breathed. She could feel them now, tightening behind her teeth. The door hadn't wanted to open. It took 3 men and a crowbar to breach the vestibule, and even then the hinges screamed like something pulled from a wet grave. Now they were gone. It was her job to document what was left. She moved slowly down the nave, notebook limp in her palm, boots echoing with the hollow grace of sacrilege. To her left, warped pews draped in mold-colored sheets, moths nesting like rosaries hung from rot. To her right, a rusted censer, split open, its chain threaded with what looked like hair. A sound behind the altar made her stop. Not a voice, just something soft, settling, like breath in the ribs of something too large to see all at once. She whispered her own name to herself, not out of fear, just to stay real. Mayor, she said. Ellen Mayor. And the chapel, of course, said nothing. There was a warmth to the stone here, though the air bit her fingers red. She rubbed them together, looked down. The choir stall had partially collapsed in, jagged with splinters, and the curve of something ivory white wedged beneath. She crouched to inspect. A hymnal, bound not in leather but some fibrous thing gone brittle with age. The title etched in childlike calligraphy, For the Midnight Offering. The stitching on the spine was hair, pale baby fur, still looped tight as thread. She swallowed. Stood. A breeze passed, though the air was still, and brought the scent of milk. Not spoiled, not sour, fresh, warmed, like it had only just been poured. She turned slowly toward the choir, and there it was. A wet mark on the stone, pale and glistening like spilled light. No leaks above, no containers near. Milk.elin stepped forward before she meant to. Her shadow split across the nave like something praying. She reached her fingers to the spot and touched it, cool and slick and real. She brought it to her lips before logic could intercept it. Was sweet and saltless, and in the silence that followed, the bell began to move. Just a groan, the first swing of rusted iron against air. But it rang. It hadn't rung since 1931, not once. The journal in her hand shook. She clutched it to her chest and turned, but the chapel did not end behind her. The walls receded. The doors disappeared. The nave yawned long like the throat of a god that swallowed children. She breathed shallow, trying to stay anchored, trying to name things: candlestand, fresco, choir rail. Her hand brushed the back of the pew, and something flaked off beneath her fingers. She looked. Teeth, milk teeth, set like tides into the wood. Hundreds of them, some still blood-crusted. A shiver climbed her back. She looked up. At the apse, a figure stood in the lightless alcove where the statue should have been. Not a nun, not quite. The veil was wrong-stitched, too long, dragging like mourning. The hands were folded, but backwards, thumb to thumb, like claws in prayer, and where her face should have been, wax, blank, child, dash-shaped. No movement, no sound, just presence. Then the veil twitched, and behind it, just for a moment, something blinked. Elin took a step back, then another. She did not turn. She would not turn. The milk on the stone was steaming now. She could smell it rising, sweet, sick. Behind her, a murmur, like lullabies sung underwater. She backed through the nave, heart knocking sideways in her chest. When her shoulder hit the entry door, she found it closed again, locked from within, though no one had touched it. She pressed her palms to the grain, whispered again, "Myrrh, Ellen, myrrh." Still nothing. So she opened the hymnal, and the pages screamed, not aloud, but in the way they curled. The ink bled in floral shapes: milk flowers, marigolds, the kind buried with infants too young to name. And there were names, dozens, each stitched in the same pale thread: Agnes, Benedetta, Fune, Little Belle. No dates, just initials, and beside each a note of penance. Spoke after hours, took bread twice, cried in the dark, drew the Virgin with her eyes open. The last page was torn, but the fragment left behind was sticky. She turned the book sideways. A nipple had been pressed between the leaves, flattened like a petal, preserved, a child's, still puckered. Ellen dropped the hymnal. The bell rang again, louder, somewhere above. Wings flurried, but not birds, too thick, too slow, and then the whisper. She fed them, even after death. The voice was not behind her, not beside her. Inside. The wax figure had moved closer, not with feet, just nearer, the veil still dragging, and in its palm wax dripped from it now was a rattle made of finger bones. Ellen could smell breast milk again, and behind it, smoke. Then her eyes caught something new, the choir stall, where the stone had been wet. It was open now, not cracked, unlatched, as if it had always been a door. Beneath it, darkness, thick with the scent of cradlewood and mold. A stair, descending. She could not speak. She could only go. Each step down hummed with something older than fear. A silence that knew names, knew hers. At the bottom, a crib, just one, empty, but the bedding still warm. She turned, and on the wall, behind her, dozens of veils hung like lungs drying. Beneath them, plaques, one read, Myrrh, E. She did not remember her mother, but she remembered this room. A soft drip echoed from above. She looked up, a single thread of milk slipping through a crack in the stone. It fell on her forehead like a blessing, or a mark, and she did not wipe it away. Behind her, the rattle shook once, then the bell stopped, and the crib exhaled. The constable's name was Liribel, though no one in the village said it anymore, not aloud. When asked, they'd cough into a cup, gesture vaguely east, and say he'd gone to Leeds, or married someone with money, or drowned himself in the mere, but no one could point to a grave. And the boots, well, the boots had been left behind. Ellen stood with her hand on the pew that bore them. Row 3, southern side, just beneath the hollow crucifix. The ash had settled the thickest here, though no flame had touched it. That was what she couldn't reconcile. No burn marks. No blackening, only the splintered wood, peeling outward like ribs forced apart. The boots were fused heel first into the grain, not set, fused. Their leather was intact, but melted at the seams, as if whatever had worn them had burned away from the inside out. She crouched, ran her gloved finger along the rim where boot met wood. A line of pale fluid oozed up, viscous, no smell, not sap. She touched it to her tongue. Milk behind her. The doors gave a low groan. Not wind, not age, just a warning, patient and sure. Ellen stood and began her sketch. She would not photograph, not yet. Some things needed distance to be seen. She traced the pew lines, noted the ruptures, and as she drew, a hush settled, thick as snowfall through glass. One of the hymnals on the floor exhaled. She turned. Nothing moved. She stepped over it for the midnight offering, its pages curled like dried skin. A small footprint marked the dust beside it. Bare left foot. The fifth toe split like a cloven hoof. She did not follow it. Instead, she reached for the constable's logbook. It had been delivered that morning from archives that shouldn't exist, sealed in red string. Marked "Do not catalogue" inside. One brittle page, and one line, scrawled as if against protest. The pews bear no scorch, but they are wet. Ellen held the page near the altar's cold flame sconces, half hoping the script would vanish. It didn't. In the margin, a second hand had underlined the word wet, and written a name beside it. Agnes. Her breath caught her ear. Not hers. Above. The rafters moaned. She didn't look up. Instead, she stepped closer to the altar rail, where a small plaque had once been bolted. The screws were still there, rusted to the shape of a cross, but the plate was missing. Only the faint outline remained, and then she saw it between the floorboards, just beyond the pew that had split. A glint of brass. She knelt, pried gently, and lifted the piece from the shadows. A tag, burnt along one edge. The engraving blurred, but 3 words remained. Bell, Constable, Infantis, Infantis, not infant, not found near infant, just Infantis, a designation, not a description. She stood slowly, heart knotted behind her ribs. The light through the broken window made a shadow, crucifix stretch across her back, and then the pew groaned, not beneath her, not near her, beneath itself, would warped, bowed, then split, outward. A single sound rose, a wet snap, and one boot fell free, spilling milk across the stone in a perfect arc. It caught the light like a blade, and something else slipped out with it, flesh, or what had once been, small, childlike, wrapped in rope, twisted from communion veils. A face turned inward, a jaw too wide, no eyes, just sockets packed with pearl buttons. Ellen did not move. A bell rang once from far above, and the milk on the floor began to curdle. The corpse had no nails, only tiny hooks where fingers should be, hooks that had etched desperate circles into the wood beneath the pew. They had clawed upward, from underneath. She wanted to run, but memory stopped her. Something her mother said once, during a fevered night Ellen thought was a dream. They keep them under the chapel, love, where the crying can't echo. She had been 6, maybe 7. She had forgotten. She was remembering. Now, the light shifted. She turned, and behind the altar, a second tag had fallen loose, caught in wax. She pried it free. Benedetta, 1901. Then another. Emer, 1912. Then a pile of them, hundreds, tied with red thread. Names she almost knew. Names she'd dreamed. Names that opened her mouth and took her breath. From the shadows behind the choir, stole. Something moved. A nun's veil dragged across the stone. Not worn, held in a child's hand, no face, just the back of a head, shorn, bleeding lightly, where the hair had been cut too close. The child stepped into view, then froze, lifted the veil like a flag, offered it. Ellen could not take it. The child opened its mouth, and out spilled milk, then teeth, then silence. She turned. The boot on the floor was rising, slow, tethered by something below, a tendon, a rope, a memory. She ran out through the ash, through the light, through the doorway the fire never touched, but behind her, the chapel breathed, and from the pew that split, the bell rang again, low, wet, n inside her mouth. The taste of milk did not fade. The wax cylinder trembled when Ellen set the needle, not with sound yet but with breath, as if the thing itself inhaled, as if the real remembered lungs. It sat like a relic on the iron gramophone, housed deep in the vestry vault, where fire hadn't reached and light rarely came. The floor above groaned with cold. Damp clung to the stones. Somewhere behind her, rope shifted. She turned the crank. Once, twice, silence, then hiss, then hum, then the voice, a child's, or what had once been. No lyrics, just the melody. Shallow and raw, sung without throat. It wavered, as if borne through water, delicate, wrong, and aching. Ellen closed her eyes. She had not meant to, but at pulls she saw it. The chapel in 1931. All Souls' Eve. Frost curling up the window glass. 7 children in soot-stitched robes, standing at the altar rail with waxy eyes and bent candles. The sisters watching from the gallery, hands folded like veils, and the priest Father Madeline silent behind his book, the air too still. The bells UNSTRUCK. Then the children began to sing. Come sleep, white lamb, they chorused. Come cradle us below. But only 6 finished. The 7th Lena Crowthorne opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Her lips moved, but the sound belonged to something else. Not her voice, not a voice at all, just noise. The wax sang that noise now. Ellen backed away. The sound filled the stone. It didn't echo, it settled, like mist into wool. She glanced at the archivist's desk. The note still lay where she'd found it, folded beneath the ledger. She must not wake. No signature, no date, just the handwriting of someone who'd once believed in structure, who wrote the letter S with care, even as his hands must have been shaken. Elin stopped the reel. The sound cut off like breath underwater. She moved to the shelves. Everything was crumbling, ledgers sealed in twine, carsacks still reeking of incense and ash. But one thing remained untouched, a narrow hymn tucked between boiler maintenance records and an exorcism request from 1896. No title, no stamp, just a cover stained pale by fingerprints too small to be adult. She opened it, and there it was. Come sleep, White lamb. The melody notated in red ink, curved like a shepherd's crook. No composer, no Latin, just verses in a child's script. Fold thy bones and hush thy hands. Thy wool is black. Thy cradle bands the lamb who sings at All Souls' Gate. Will find no dawn. Will wait. Will wait. Ellen touched the margin. A droplet stained the page. She hadn't cried. Not yet. But something inside her had begun to bleed. Beneath the hymn was a name, scratched in Lena. She'd vanished, the record said, in the fourth verse. Her candle rolled down the chancel steps. Her cloak collapsed onto itself, still buttoned. No one saw her leave. No door opened. No footstep fell. Just silence where a girl had been. The sisters went on singing, and when they finished, they bowed, and the priest began again. The record had been sealed by the diocese. That same night, Ellen turned as a sound rose behind her, scraping chain on stone. She moved back toward the wax cylinder, as if it could shield her, as if truth, once played, might behave. The air tasted sweet, rotten like milk warmed too long. A crack ran through the floor at her feet, thin, silent, curling like a ribbon toward the altar stone above. From somewhere deep in the walls. A hum, returned. Not from the GRAMOPHONE. From underneath. She turned and saw them. 7 choir robes hung along the back wall like skinned things, small, mismatched, each stitched with names, each tied at the neck with red thread. They swayed though. There was no draft. One dropped. It landed with a side. And beneath it, a smear. Milk, or something that wanted to be. She knelt, touched it. Her fingers came away wet. Then the wax reel began again. She hadn't touched it, but the voice had returned, faint, then louder, then overlapping. More than one child, singing through each other, notes slurred into knots. And behind the song, weeping, not grief. Something lower, hungrier. She turned the crank to stop it. It kept spinning. Then something knocked once from inside the machine. She stepped back. Then a second knock. The hymnal in her hand grew heavy. She opened it again, this time beneath the verses, a drawing, crude, a crib, surrounded by nuns in veils. One veil was lifted. The nun had no face, just a mouth, and the mouth was open too wide. Ellen dropped the book. The air turned hot, sweet, thick. And then came the whisper, not aloud, but behind her eyes. They didn't bury her name. They baptized it. A lullaby crawled into her teeth. A shape flickered in the crack at her feet, small, pale fingers reaching upward, searching for a throat to hold. She ran. The robes stirred. One sleeve twitched as she passed, and just as she reached the stairs, the wax reel hissed loud, then stopped, not with silence, with a giggle, and the voice of a child she almost recognized, humming in a throat she'd never seen. Below the vault, from the crack in the floor, a breath escaped, wet. Sleep, dash-shaped. And very, very old. The vestry had no windows, only a slit above the lintel where frost sometimes whispered through. No candles had been lit in decades, yet soot still rimmed the corners like breath stains. Ellen stepped across the threshold with the slow respect one grants tombs, her torch, low, her hand against the damp wall. Here the stones were warm, not hot, just faintly holding something, like milk left beneath linen. The door shut behind her. She didn't close it. A ledger lay open on the writing desk, the page warped with damp, the ink haloed as if wept upon. Beside it, a white cloth folded, crisp and stained, blood or milk, or both. She touched the page, her gloved fingers trembling at the indentation of the last entry. I locked her in the font. The water will keep her bones soft. Signed, E. Belgrave. She had read about Edith, war widow, hired as the chapel's caretaker after her husband drowned at Pastiendel. Never recovered. Said little. Sang once a week with the orphans during services. Bled daily from the hands eczema, they'd said. But her gloves were always wet. Ellen reached for the cloth. It was heavier than it should have been. Unfolded, it revealed a veil, child-sized bone buttons at the chin, and stitched into the hem. Agnes. She dropped it. Her breath steamed in the cold, but the air here smelled warm, sweet, unsettling. Milk again. At the far wall stood a wardrobe, narrow, cedar, though the wood had split down the middle as if something inside had outgrown its name. A faint chime echoed from within, like wind through hollow teeth. She opened it. No robes, no brooms, just a rope hung high, worn smooth with use. At its end dangled a small iron bell. silent now, but blackened, as if boiled. On the inner door, a note had been nailed, not written, stitched, letters sewn in dried thread. She did not scream. She gurgled like milk boiling over. Ellen backed away. The wardrobe breathed in the dark. Something wet slipped behind her ear. She turned. The font stood in the corner, marble cracked, its lid long gone, but the water there was water still, unmoving, opaque. She stepped closer. Inside, no reflection, only white, floating near the surface. A lock of hair, too pale, too fresh. Beneath it, a shrouded shape, a body, small dot. She reached forward, not to touch, just to see. But the water rippled, though her hand remained above. It recoiled from her, then settled, then hummed, a song, not heard, felt, behind the teeth, in the joints, in the old part of the chest where lullabies become commands. Come, sleep, white lamb. Ellen gasped. The air inside the vestry closed like cloth around a wound. Behind her, footsteps bare slow. She turned and saw her. Edith Belgrave, or something shaped like her. The war widow's dress hung loose, sodden. Her hands dripped. One finger bent wrong. But her eyes were open, still, grayer than they should be, watching Ellen without moving. Ellen tried to speak, but Edith shook her head once, a mother's warning, a nursery hush. Then Edith raised her hand, and pointed dot to the font, dot to the thing beneath, dot to the child she had drowned. Elin stepped forward. Her boots sank into something soft. She didn't look down. She couldn't. Why? She whispered. Edith did not answer, but her hand moved to her stomach, flat, then to her mouth, then pointed again. The gesture was clear, not drowned. Fed. Elin staggered back. Her heel hit the wardrobe door. It swung, and the rope bell swung with its chiming once. Softly, the child beneath the water opened her eyes. Milk pale, vein-laced, wide, and she smiled. A smile that split, that stretched, that wanted. Ellen fell to her knees. The font rippled toward her like breath. She reached again, not to take, to witness, to know. The water parted. And from it rose a hymn, a real voice now. A girl's, singing from beneath. Fold thy bones and hush thy hands. Ellen choked. The voice filled her mouth. She wanted to run, to scream, but Edith Belgrave stepped forward, gently, like one correcting a child. She knelt behind Ellen and touched her shoulder. Wet, so very wet. Her voice was thin, years dried but clear. She was never mine, Edith said, but I kept her teeth in my apron. Ellen turned to her. What did you do? Edith smiled. She awoke before the bell. That's not allowed. Ellen stood. The hymn swelled. The font boiled, not with heat, but memory. 100 small voices rising, from the cracks, from the pipes, from the ropes. She did not scream, Edith whispered. She gurgled like milk boiling over. Then silence. Edith stepped back, into the wardrobe. The rope swung behind her. And she closed the door. The bell rang once more, then stopped. Ellen turned to the font. The veil had surfaced. Agnes's name bleeding through the thread. She picked it up. It was warm, and in the water, beneath the stillness. The girl waited, smiling, bones soft, bont, humming. Elin did not want to see what lay beneath the veil, but the wind moved without her. It slipped through the broken vestry slit and caught the fabric like a hand, pulling it gently aside. The baptismal basin was smaller than she'd expected, carved stone, scalloped lip, stained with the shape of something cradled too long. The bowl had been drained once, then filled again, not with water, with something thicker, clotted, quiet. 17 teeth lay at the bottom, pale, pitted, some still strung with gum thread, one set beside a crucifix gone green with age. The iron bent slightly, as though gripped in someone's final clench. The child's veil beside it was damp, the name stitched into the hem illegible, the thread run through with something like soot. Ellen's hand hovered above it. She did not touch. She simply counted. 17 infants. No births, no burials, no burials, no baptisms filed, and one tooth did not belong. It was too large, curved, not straight, hollowed at the root, as if designed to hold something. It was molar-shaped, but the crown flared outward, tapering like a tiny bell. She stared. It stared back from Bishop Claridge's inquiry notes, recovered from the sacristy safe. No child is born with a bell-shaped molar. Ellen tried to steady her breath, but the air here was not air. It was milk, mist, heavy, metallic, familiar. Somewhere, far off, deep beneath, the sound of a chain dragged across tile. She crouched beside the basin. Her torch trembled, the light drawing broken halos on the stone wall. Behind her, the statue of the Madonna looked down with one eye missing, cracked clean down the cheek. Her infant's face was untouched, smiling, teeth too sharp. From the basin's edge, Ellen saw it, a nail mark, small, just one, dragged through the silt. A child saw something once shaped like one. The trail it left coiled up toward the rim, then stopped, as if it had waited, or watched. Then she heard it, a sound that should not have been sound at all, a hum, like breath in a jawless mouth. It came from beneath the stone, not echoing, not rising, just there, still. She stepped back. Her boot struck something soft. She turned. On the floor, a hymn book she had not seen when she entered, open to Cradle Litany for All Innocents, though the script was wrong, childlike, but off, to even every E looped backward. She picked it up. The page stuck slightly as it turned, and there, beneath the printed lines, something had been added in faint pencil. When the lamb does gnaw the rope, when the veil no longer soaks, place the tooth beneath the bell. Let her drink, and never tell. The page smelled like milk, and something underneath it had soaked through. She peeled the next sheet back, drawn on the parchment, a baptismal font. This one, with ropes around its base. 4, crossed in the shape of a cradle, each tied with a tooth, each connected to a bell. Below it, a word repeated 4 times, scrawled until the paper thinned. Wake. The book slipped from her hands. Light flickered against the wall. Not her torch. From beneath the basin, a glow, faint, like something lit from inside a rib cage. She stepped forward again, against everything in her bones, looked closer, and saw it. Inside the basin, the crucifix had begun to rise, not float ascend, carried on a string of white tooththread, pulled taut by something below. At the end of the string, the bell-shaped molar pulsed once, then rolled. It rang, not loud, just enough. The basin filled implusibly. Fluid climbed the stone, thick, not water. Milk laced with soot, with hair, with flakes of wax. She could smell it. It curdled mid-air. She turned to run, but the vestry door had shut. A breath came from the font, and then the voice. High, crooked, unbodied. They didn't bury her name. They baptized it. The hymn book behind her flipped open. On its own, pages fluttered. Stopped. On a drawing. The font again, but full of mouths. 17 small mouths, none of them closed. All of them smiling. One, the largest, held something in its lips, a bell. The caption read, "The one who bites the bell shall sing." She backed away. Something knocked inside the basin. Once, then again. Milk trickled over the rim, trailing down the stone like veins. When it touched the floor, it hissed, not hot, just wrong. Her torch dimmed, or maybe the room deepened. The cracked Madonna loomed again behind her, and now the baby's mouth was open. A line of black leaked from its gums. She blinked. The hymn began. From nowhere, from the pipe, from the stone, from inside her, a lullaby made of bells and breath and bone. She covered her ears. It did not help. The tooth in the basin began to ring softly, like a pendulum searching for a throat. She reached toward it. Something wet touched her finger, not fluid. Tongue, small, human. She screamed, but only inside. The tooth stopped ringing. The crucifix dropped back in with a hiss. Silence. The milk settled. All that remained on the surface was one name, drawn in the liquid itself, clear as breath on glass. Elin. The name she hadn't spoken since she entered. The name the stone knew. Now, she did not breathe. She did not move. From behind the door came a whisper. She never spoke again. But the stains on her bed never left. Then a knock. Then a silence shaped like a cradle. And the tooth, at last, stopped ringing. Elin found the bell tower sealed, not by lock, but by silence. The rope had long been cut. What remained of it hung in strands down the inner shaft like wet hair, frayed at the base, and darkened with a substance that no longer wept. She stepped beneath it, one hand on the stone arch for balance, and felt it before she heard it, a deep, animal stillness, like breath withheld. Dust fell in thin spirals from the beams overhead. Her torch flickered against lichen-covered masonry, casting the shape of a cradle where no cradle should be, and above that, anchored in rusted rigging between 4 stone brackets, The bell still hung black, smooth, unnamed. There were no foundry marks, no inscription, not even a clapper visible through its mouth. Just a single faint depression on one side, thumb-shaped, as if pressed in while still molten. The bell is not listed in any registry of ecclesiastical metallurgy. She'd read, "It does not exist according to Rome." She stepped forward. The floor moaned. No one had rung it in nearly a century. Not since 1931, when it sounded without hands, without chain. Villagers said it sang. Not a chime, not a toll. A voice, full and awful, like a child trying to mimic a sermon. The following spring, the bishop ordered it removed. The stonecutters came in silence. No parish led the prayer. No cross was carried. They dismounted the bell at dusk and rolled it by oxen cart through the fields. And none who stood witness remembered where it was buried. But it was here still, or something shaped like it. Ellen circled it now, boots soft against soot-choked wood. On the far side of the bell was a hymn etched shallowly into the timber frame, half covered by grime and time. She wiped it with her sleeve. "Come sleep, white lamb, and leave the womb. The veil is soaked. The mouth is room. Below it, a handprint, too small for a mason, too wide for a child." She reached toward the bell. Her fingers shook before they met the metal. It was warm. She drew her hand back, and beneath her glove, a pale smear of soot remained. No, not soot. Milk, thickened, clinging. A sound rose beneath the floor. Not a creak, not an echo, a dragging. Something metallic scraping across hollow stone. She turned her torch down. Through the gaps in the boards, she saw a shadow circling. Then a voice. Not from the bell. From the walls. She rang herself. "We never touched the rope." Ellen froze. The voice was old and small. A girl's, worn thin by waiting. She turned the torch upward. Again. Now the bell seemed larger, closer. She stepped back. A shard of stained glass lay at her feet, miraculously unbroken, a sliver from the western clerestory, showing an unnamed angel with hollow eyes and one finger held to her lips. Silence. The bell moved, only slightly. A swing not made by wind, not weight. She stumbled backward. Her boot hit a plank that gave with a soft crack. The sound echoed like breath across wood. From the rafters above the bell, something dangled, a veiled child, sized, wet. It swung slowly, not from air, but from song. She could hear it now, deep in her teeth. The note, not pitched for music, pitched for memory. She knelt beside the bell and placed her ear to the wood. A low voice hummed, lullaby, but reversed. The cradle falling shut, she rose and moved to the tower window. The pane was long shattered. Moss framed the opening. She saw withered fields in the distance, blanched and brittle, a single path cut through the corn toward nowhere. Then she saw it, a pit, circular, overgrown. And within it a shape, covered by boards, anchored by crosses. The bell was never removed. It had been buried alive. Below her, the bell creaked once, then again, then stopped. From the darkness beneath the floor came the sound of teeth clicking, a single line of breath against her neck. It only rings for the ones who remember. She turned. The bell tilted forward. Milk dripped from its mouth, not spilled, offered. A white thread pulled from inside, attached to it. A tooth. Bell shaped. She dropped her torch. The flame caught the dust mid-air, and for a moment, the whole tower glowed gold. Inside the bell's mouth a crib, not carved, not placed. Grown. Bonewood, stitched with veils, filled with wax figures, each with mouths open, all humming. The veil above her snapped, and the bell rang. No clapper, no hand, just the sound of a child's name rung backwards. Elin, no longer her name, just a summons. From below the boards came the sound of crawling, and the cradle in the bell began to rock. She reached for the window, but it was gone. Behind her, the bell swung again, and the crib sang louder. It did not toll. It remembered. It rang, for no one. And someone answered. It was not the font itself that disturbed Ellen, though the water within had never stilled. Even now, it trembled faintly, as though something beneath stirred in rhythm to breath, no longer living. It was the wall behind it, a half-meter of stone that looked newer than the rest. Bricks uneven, mortar sloppy, as if added in haste, as if to seal rather than support. She stepped closer. The air grew warmer, not from heat, but from memory. Dust tasted faintly of smoke, of hair, of the last breath exhaled into wet cloth. She pressed a gloved palm to the wall. Beneath her skin, the faintest echo of vibration, not sound, like hymns hummed by the floor itself. Ellen reached for her chisel, began to chip. Each strike loosened something older. The scent deepened, candles long gone, wool scorched, skin not fully turned to ash. On the sixth blow, the wall gave. A single brick tumbled forward and struck the stone with a muffled clink. Behind it, dark, not empty. She lowered her torch. What emerged first was fabric blackened and fused to itself. Choir robes. Child sighed. One sleeve melted into the floor, as though the wearer had knelt too long in flame. Ellen's breath caught. She stepped inside. The hollow was shallow, braced by rotted beams. It smelled of old wax and wet cloth, and there at the 17 pairs, perfectly aligned, all incised, all stitched shut, laces sewn through the tongue and tied with red thread, each knot crusted over. No foot could slip in or out. She crouched beside them. The soles were scorched, but not the stitching. Someone had prepared them after the fire. Near them, priest's vestments, folded, but torn. The sleeves shredded from shoulder to cuff. The fabric stiff. Blood, but not only blood. Ellen reached into the folds, pulled something free. A strip of veil, still damp, its edge lined with teeth, not set, but threaded, strung like beads through the lace. She counted 6. The third one was still warm. She did not speak. She could not. The silence here was thick, sacred, not holy, but held. And then her torch passed over something hidden in the wall's corner. A ledger singed along the edges, pages stuck together, cover embossed only with the outline of a cross, burned shallow as if pressed against skin. She opened it, each page handwritten in the priest's hand. Father Madeline, the ink looped neatly, a schoolboy's script until the entries neared their end. Then the lines slanted. Dates blurred, names repeated. Lena Crowthorne, Agnes Murr, Little Bell. Then others with no surnames. Crib 3, Crib 4, one simply marked, refused milk. Each name was followed by a ritual description. Not sacrament, not baptism. Offerings. Double quotes, anointed with soot and white wax. Hymn begun at 11:55, rope secured, font prepared. Ash mixed with milk, choir to hum, not sing. Do not make the sign. She turned the page. The final entry read, All Souls Eve, 1931. Voice heard beneath the nave at 2:14 a.m. Refrain returned from stone. Teeth found in basin before fire began. I did not bless it. I only watched. Signed Maloranthe. Ink bled outward as if still wet. Beneath the signature, a pressed fingerprint. Thumb, not the priest's. Too small. She touched it, and the font behind her rang. Not loud, not struck, just the sound of something wet settling. She turned. A veil floated on the surface now. Not hers. Not anyone's, she remembered, but beneath it, something blinked. To pale circles, not quite eyes. The ledger slipped from her hands. She stepped back into the hollow. Dust curled around her boots. The choir robes hissed softly, as if breathing through char. A wind rose. From nowhere, from deep, from below. It carried a voice not said, but remembered. God's house does not keep fire, it carries it. Her body froze, but her thoughts did not. What had been sealed behind this wall was not evidence. It was continuation. The ledger had not ended. It had been paused and someone had resumed it. She knelt beside the vestments again, slipped her hand beneath. The folds found something stiff. Another page, torn from the book. On one side, the words "Wake her gently." On the other, a drawing, a font, cracked, with ropes tied at 4 corners. Inside it, a cradle of soot, a bell above, a tooth below. A single word carved into the stone beneath. Ellen. She stumbled backward. The ledger flared, caught a light without spark. Milk hissed through the cracks in the font. The robes stood up, not worn, not lifted, just risen, and the voice beneath the font hummed the first note of a hymn not yet written. She covered her ears. It didn't help. From the back of the hollow, the priest's vestments moved, sleeves empty, but reaching, and something behind the wall whispered. Her mother's name, then hers, and the font began to boil. The ink had bled, not outward and into the grain of the paper, into the desk beneath, into the stone that held it. It wept between the fibers like blood through linen. Ellen lifted the ledger with care, her gloves already damp from where the leather cover had absorbed too much. There were rows inside, A record of names, columned with the precision of something sacred. Crib designations, birthmarks, defects, song, participation, penance recommendations, then crossed out. An entire page, defaced over and over. The ink striking not through the names, but across the lines where a name should have been. She traced it. The pressure of the pen had torn through parchment, down to the page beneath. The margin had been written over, until illegible. Scratched again with a newer hand. She is not to be listed. She was never born here. Below it, something added in what looked like ash. The sleeper. The words left grit on her fingertip. She rubbed it clean and turned the page. The pattern repeated. Every child named Agnes, Lena, Fune, Little Bell. Some dates were etched too faint to read, but all were recorded. Logged like sacraments, like items. All but one, the same black line. Again and again, like a tremor. The lines beneath bore no dates, just tally marks. 17, then crossed out. Then 16, then 17 again. No mention of a death, no mention of baptism. The sleeper is not baptized. Read a clipped parchment tucked between the folds. She is not claimed by the cloth. The note bore the parish seal, and beneath it, a sermon draft in an unknown hand. She must not wake, not in this world. The paper shuddered. No breeze, just something shifting in the chapel beyond. Elin stood from the desk. Her knees ached, not from time, but from the stone's cold memory. She took the ledger with her and moved toward the altar. Light leaked in from the broken rose window, splintering over the nave in silent, circular fragments. The font still boiled faintly, though nothing living stirred within. She laid the ledger on the altar. Its weight seemed wrong, off. She opened to the first marked page, touched the name scratched out, and then the bell rang. Not loud, but impossibly close. A tone like a jaw clicking, like a nail drawn across tooth enamel. She looked up. The statues wept wax, a trickle from each saint's eyes, solidifying mid-drip. Mary, Joseph, an unnamed martyr holding a rope in both fists, each mouth slightly agape, as if they had been caught mid-dashim. She turned to the font, the sound beneath it. Breathing. But wrong. To slow. Each inhale a sentence, left unfinished. The ledger flipped pages on its own, once, twice, 3 times. It stopped on the back cover. A folded page had been sewn into the binding, not tuck-stitched, hidden behind the spine. She tore gently. The paper came loose with a sigh. It held a list, handwritten but different, older, more like a chant. Then a record, a litany. She of the veil, she of the rope, she of the basin, she of the bell, and below, she who sleeps with wax in her mouth, she whose teeth have not fallen, she whose name eats names. Elin backed away. The bell tone returned, deeper as if rung through water. She moved toward the vestry door, but it had closed behind her again. Not locked, just unopened. The floor beneath the font gave a soft groan. Then another. Elin turned. A shape had risen in the font. Not a child, not quite. The veil was soaked, stretched over something that twitched with every movement of her own breath. The mouth was covered by wax, but beneath it, teeth, perfect, whole, and far too many that wax cracked. Lin dropped the ledger, pages bent. The hidden note fluttered free and landed at her feet. She knelt to retrieve it. One last line had been written across the bottom in faded ink. If she wakes, no one sings again. The shape in the font made no sound, but the air around it hummed. The veil lifted, very slightly, with breath. A hand rose, barely formed. Fingers fused by waxhand pointed at the ledger. Elin turned. The last page, once blank, now bore a single line, a name, hers, not written, burned under it, in blood-dark ink. Crib 18. She stumbled backward. The hand in the font curled into a fist. The wax mouth split, and though no voice came, she heard it inside her, beneath thought, beneath breath. They didn't bury her name, they baptized it. A single drop of milk rolled from the font, hissing against the stone, and from somewhere behind the altar wall, knocking. Once, twice, then a sound not made for waking ears. The rope in the saint's fists began to fray, and the cracked rose window turned dark. The grave dirt was warm that year, too warm for November, though no one said it aloud. The kind of warmth that curled bread in a basket and called flies from the rafters. Felicity Gorse worked in silence. Her apron hung damp at the waist, and her boots left no imprint, though the soil should have taken. She hadn't spoken since the coffins were delivered. 7. Lidless, identical. No nails, no lining, just pine stained darker than nature allowed. Each bore a ribbon red, and inside, not bodies, bread, fresh, still warm. She'd opened one, the first, touched the crust, her fingers sank into it like flesh. The loaf was shaped with uncanny precision, curled in the way a newborn's back might rest after baptism. It smelled faintly of milk. She closed the lid, and did not open the others. They're not gone, she whispered to the priest who came to bless them. They're inside. Screaming is louder under soil. He left before dusk, did not touch the shovel. The townsfolk came next, slow-footed and blue-eyed. They stood in a ring, around the meadow plot, eyes fixed on Felicity's hands. No hymns, no crosses, just the quiet creak of bones wrapped in cloth and memory. No one asked why the children had no headstones. Felicity did not speak again. She buried them alone. The first 3 coffins sank cleanly. The 4th cracked. Bread burst from the seam. Steaming, she stuffed it back with the heel of her hand. Beneath it, something small and hard shifted. Not bone, a tooth still rooted. She placed it in her pocket. The 5th coffin resisted. The soil hardened beneath, pulsing with heat. She had to press her whole weight down, rocking it until it sank. When she stood again, her apron was damp with milk. By the 6th her hands had blistered. By the 7th, she no longer felt her arms, but she finished, and stood. The meadow rang, not a bell, just pressure. A tone felt through the gums. She did not cry. She gathered the veils they left behind. 7, laid out like napkins beside the grave, each stitched with teeth. She folded them once, then again, and placed them in her basket. Then she walked home. Inside the parlor, she found the ledger, her husband's. He'd kept immaculate notes, measurements, client names, dates of burial, and cause until 1931. Then only 7 words written over and over, like a pen forced through the same cut. They didn't sing, they screamed inside. He'd hanged himself in the stairwell. She never moved his body, let it dry like rope. She lived below him for 20 years now. She opened the stove, removed the last loaf, that hissed not from heat, from voice. She slit it down the middle. Ash inside, and something wrapped in linen, a hymn page, cracked at the fold, torn at the title, but legible still, for the sleeper only. She did not read the verses, she'd memorized them long ago. She took the tooth from her pocket, placed it on the page. It rang, a bell's echo from a jaw not present. She folded the page, tucked it into her bodice, and stepped outside. The town was quiet, smoke low, the chapel visible only by the broken spire that leaned like a listening ear. She walked back to the meadow. The soil had cracked. Just one grave. The 3rd, the crust of the bread coffin split down its center. Like breath pressing upward, she knelt. A hand had emerged, childlike waxen, fingers stitched shut with hymn thread. Felicity took her own sewing scissors. And snipped. One by one, the fingers relaxed, a palm unfurled. Inside, crumbs, and a milk tooth set in the middle, as if the hand were a mouth. She placed the 2nd tooth beside the 1st. Then stood. From behind her, the church bell groaned once, not rung. Grieved. She turned to face it, and saw a figure in the tower. No face, just a child's silhouette behind cracked glass. A hand raised, not waving, pointing. To the soil. To her. To what she'd buried, without name. Her apron darkened at the hem. Milk, again. She did not move, the tooth in her pocket, HUMMED, and from the broken grave, a voice whispered. The coffins were filled with bread, still warm. She looked down. The grave had closed itself, but the ribbon floated atop the dirt, untied. A wind passed. It did not stir then. For the first time in 20 years, Felicity Gorse whispered a name, not hers, not the children's, but the one she was told never to speak, the sleeper. And beneath her feet, the soil sighed. Like a mouth that finally swallowed, and somewhere in the town a door closed that had never been open. They found her on the 7th morning, just as the mist broke over the moors, edge crumpled where the stone met peat, her skirt soaked to the waist, and stiff with something sour. Her boots were off. One was lodged in a furrow, filled with a single white feather. The other lay beside her body. Folded into the sole was a page, a single line written in pencil, barely legible through the damp. The bell woke me. Her mouth was slightly open, lips grey. tongue slack against a shape that looked like a communion wafer but was already dissolved, leaving only the faint outline. Chalk white and shivering like an apology. She did not speak, she did not blink, but the hum began the moment they lifted her, not from her throat deeper, from the soft hollow beneath her ribs. Come sleep, white lamb. The constables recoiled. The nurse dropped the stethoscope. A field doctor, Dr. Lorin, last of the Witherbridge men, to keep the old faith, checked her pupils, then her wrists. Then he looked to the horizon and asked, no one in particular, who rang it. They brought her to St. Hildegard's infirmary. The nuns made her a bed in the last alcove. No mirror, no crucifix. The bell pull above her head had been removed. She lay still for 2 days. She breathed, but never deeply. Milk-crusted. Beneath her fingernails on the 3rd day, Sister Fune entered to wash her feet. She found small burns behind the ankles, not fire, friction, ropes. The marks were circular, symmetrical, tied inwards. On the 4th day, her mouth bled. The stain on the pillow was faint, but shaped like a child's footprint. No visitors came, except once. At dusk, a girl in a veil stood. At the far end of the corridor, the veil was stitched with teeth. She did not speak. When Sister Fune approached, she was gone. Ellen's humming stopped for a full hour after. It resumed at midnight, slower now. Lower. The staff stopped entering her room. They left the meals by the door. Most were untouched. One bowl of milk was found emptied and crusted with soot. A parish inspector came on the 6th night. Rev. Barrow Diocese archivist, retired. He wore gloves. Though he never touched her, he only stood at the foot of the bed and recited from a page he burned afterward. The line he read aloud, "The sleeper is not to be claimed." Ellen opened her eyes then, only briefly. They were milk-white, a flicker beneath, like candlelight moving inside. Glass. She did not blink, she did not weep, she just hummed the next line. "Thy wool is black, thy cradle bands." Rev. Barrow left before morning. They found the wafer imprint still wet against her tongue. That same hour, the infirmary bell tolled once. No rope pulled, no a hand nearby. The rope was still missing, but the sound rang, like metal struck underwater. The nuns said nothing, they simply knelt. By day 7, the townsfolk stopped asking questions. The chapel's door was bricked again. The soil over the meadow graves had cracked. Once, then resealed. And Felicity Gorse's window had gone dark. But Ellen breathed, and hummed, and beneath her bed a patch of damp spread in the shape of a veil. The nurse on call that night, Hallett, junior sister, tempted to clean it. She lifted the mattress, and beneath it, teeth. 17. Laid in a crescent, still warm. She did not return. The warden found her room stripped bare the next day, except for one note, stuck with a wax pin to the wall. She never spoke again. But the stains on her bed never left. Ellen's hum grew fainter after that, but never ceased. Even when the mouth no longer moved, the sound came from within. A wax cylinder recorder was brought in by the diocese under secrecy. It captured 11 minutes. Only 7 were preserved. The final 4 were erased. Burned. Buried. Labeled unholy. Thread. What remains begins with a child's voice, but not Ellen's. Not entirely. Something layered, older, rooted deeper than throat. At minute 4, the tone becomes a trembled dot. At minute 6, bells begin beneath it. At minute 7, the sound breaks. Not into scream, into silence, thick as cloth, and then a whisper. Not captured by machine, but recorded by hand. Written by Rev. Barrow himself before he vanished. They didn't bury her name, they baptized it. On the morning of the 8th day, Ellen stood. She did not falter. She walked barefoot down the corridor, her feet wet with something that left no mark. She passed the bell tower. The ropes lay coiled like umbilical cords. She did not touch them, but the bell rang once. Low. Then again. Higher. Then a 3rd time. Not in pitch. In voice. End on the final toll. She opened her mouth. Nothing emerged but breath and the shape of a cradle drawn in steam on the infirmary window. It lasted too long. Even as she turned away, even as she walked toward the moor, even as she hummed the refrain for the last time, she must not wake. Not in this world. But the bell had. And Ellen Mare was no longer lost, only returned, and somewhere behind the cracked altar door unlatched itself. Not opened, just waited. It was a morning salted with frost, though the fields still steamed. In the parish log of March 12, 1901, someone likely Father Madeline, though the signature was half effaced, wrote only this: "The boy opened his mouth. What came out was not his. His name was never recorded. Or rather, it was, but ink had been scraped from the vellum so many times the fibres had frayed. What remained was a smudge shaped like a bell. He was born in the vestry, behind the font. Between the hours of matins and lauds, no midwife had been summoned. Sister Corin claimed she was led there in a dream, and found the mother laid out on the flagstones, blood pooling into the mortar dot. No one recognized the woman. Her teeth had all fallen out. The infant never cried. He hummed. The tune soft, constant was noted by 3 separate attendees. Each wrote it differently, but all versions share the same refrain. Come sleep, white lamb. He suckled only twice, then stopped. Refused milk, refused swaddling. But at 3 months old, during Mass, he spoke. Not babbled, not cooed. Spoke. A homily. Witnesses recorded fragments. The womb is not a cradle. The cradle is not a grave. A bishop was summoned from Leeds. He brought a recorder. Wax cylinder. They say the machine melted before the 4th verse. By 7 months, the boy's teeth had grown in full 20, white as candle stubs. He bit the rector's hand when a baptism was offered, drew blood, refused the cross. Sister Agnes burned her hands trying to veil him. Sister Agnes would later disappear. The child was never seen after Whitsun. Officially, he died in his sleep. Unofficially, he never slept. The crib was found overturned. The blanket was shaped like a mouth, and the pillow still hummed. Ellen read all of this in the archives, beneath the library at Witherbridge Hollow, a place never marked on maps, yet always unlocked. The records were kept in a box labeled unsorted, do not consult. But when she opened the lid, the smell of milk rose, and beneath the top layer, a hymn book, small, soft, bound in skin. Inside the infants, CANTICLE, and beneath the first line, a drawing, not a cherub, not a saint, just a crib. Inside it, a child with no eyes, and a mouth too old, a mouth that smiled. She turned the page, lyrics written in a shaky, narrow hand. Not every child is born to be held. Some are born to listen. The page after that was torn, but beneath the gap, in soot-charred letters, he heard the hymn before his lungs. He sang before the umbilical was cut. Ellen stared too long. The paper bled, not ink, not water. A thin stream of milk leaked from the binding, pooling in the corner of the desk. She reached to close the book. It breathed, a soft exhale of steam, a single note left behind. She stood. The archives creaked behind her. Chains, RST-led, not binding dragging. She turned. Cribs lined the walls now. She hadn't noticed them before. 7 all. Empty. All rocking. 1 had a hymnal placed where a child's head might rest. Its cover was stitched shut with red thread. She stepped forward. A soft knock beneath her feet once. Twice she knelt, pressed her hand to the stone. It was warm, and then a voice, high, but wrong, like a man speaking through a flute. He was never born. He was delivered. Ellen gasped. The wax dripped from the lamp. Above. It landed on her hand. She did not flinch, because beneath the pain she heard it. The lullaby spoken now, not sung, in his voice. The baby who preached. The body is not the burial. The mouth is not the gate. The cribs creaked louder. One veil dropped from the rafters. It landed beside her knee, soaked and stitched. With teeth. One of the teeth was black, bell-shaped. It rang. Just once, and she remembered. She had heard that voice before, not in the chapel. In her crib, long ago, when her mother sang, but not alone. There had been another note underneath. She turned back to the hymnal, opened it. The last page bore a name, hers, scratched. Then beneath it, Ellen I. She dropped the book. Milk hissed from the seams, and from the shadows of the archiva. Cradle rolled forward. Empty. But carved with scripture. She must not wake, not in this world. The cradle stopped at its wheels, marked the floor with soot. A lullaby played from nowhere, and the desk behind her collapsed. Pages scattered like feathers, and beneath them, all our single tooth, still warm. She picked it up. It rang, and from far above the church bell answered. Slow. Sweet. And far too late. Before the chapel came, there was the moor, and before the moor bore its name, it bore her. The wool mother. No text says so plainly, but the air does. the wind that moves over Witherbridge, hollow in spirals too neat for accident, that carries the scent of milk in winter, even when no cattle stand. The villagers say little now, unless at dusk, but children hum a rhyme they never recall learning. When the fleece is shorn at night, keep your crib in candlelight. If the thread unravels slow, Wool Mother's feet will find your toe. Ellen had heard it once, faintly, through a door barely cracked. A child, no older than 4, singing with their cheek pressed to the floorboards. It followed her now. She walked, the moor's edge alone, where stone met heather, carrying the sealed envelope from the diocesan box. It bore no return address, only the parish crest pressed in wax. Inside, a single clipped line from the Crown Archive, 1863. Infants do not lie, but they remember. The envelope smelled of lanolin. She stopped where the ground changed, the peat darker here, almost spongy. A rusted iron ring jutted from the earth. She knelt, brushed it free of moss. The soil beneath pulsed slightly, like breath through wool. The wind shifted. She stood and followed it. 15 paces west, then south again. There it was, the spiral still, faint, but etched in the grass like a scorch mark. Dried thistles and clumped fleece circled inward around a central hollow, just deep enough for a cradle, or a child. She stepped forward, and the silence thickened, not absence of sound and old, presence of it, the kind spun by superstition, or by guilt too old to name. Here, the Wool Mother walked. The tales said, barefoot, always barefoot. Her soles soaked in salt and soot, her ankles ringed in milk-rotted rope. She did not carry the children. She called them. The spiral was her voice. Ellen crouched and pressed her palm to the center. It felt warm. Beneath the peat, something gave softness. She dug, slowly 6 inches down. Her fingers struck fabric. She pulled Wool Child's blanket. Still folded, still damp. The weave frayed, but the pattern unmistakably 3 white lambs, ringed in thorns, and tucked in the fold, a slip of paper. No date, no ink, only a word burned into the grain. She held it a moment too long. The word smudged to ash in her hand. From behind her, a rustle. She turned. Nothing moved, but the grass bent in the shape of a footstep. Then another dot, and then the sound, like fleece torn slowly, like a lullaby hummed backward. She turned back toward the ring the spiral had. Closed, no grass, only wool, a carpet of it, damp and grey, extending outward from her like a birthcloth. She stepped backward, and it moved, not with wind, not with weight, not with breath. It exhaled beneath her. The next step sank. She knelt again, pressed her ear to the wool, heard them crying, hundreds of infants, too young to speak, but old enough to remember. The rope at her side unraveled. She had no rope. She had stood, but her boots were gone, her feet now bare, and beneath her heels. The wool began to part. A path. The moor had opened, not a door, a mouth, and inside it, veils hung like skin, each stitched with a name. She stepped forward. The wool curled up her legs, from the hollow in the earth. A figure began to rise, not fully formed, not fully bone, a body made of robes and teeth and lullabies, and where the face should be, a veil stitched shut, but behind it humming. Ellen opened her mouth, and heard the hymn, but not her voice, his, the child, who preached, the sleeper's twin, the first to hear, the last to sing. She stepped toward the veil. It parted for her, not torn just unwoven, and behind it, a crib of fleece, still rocking, still warm. Inside, something that pulsed, not heart, not flesh, just sound. A voice woven from 30 lambs, drowned in a spiral, from a midwife's last breath, strung from her own ceiling, from 30 infants who had not lied, but remembered. Ellen knelt, and the Wool Mother breathed through her once, then again, and on the third Ellen sang, but the sound came from the wool, from beneath, and somewhere behind the chapel. A thread snapped, and a door began to unravel. There is a silence kept in Vatican archives that cannot be prayed away. It gathers between vellum and salt, where the walls are measured in confessions and mistakes are embalmed in wax. On May 9, 2090, an archivist named Lorette, Gervais newly sanctioned, eyes not yet adjusted to the candlelight, pressed the wrong seal. She thought it was a 17th century indulgence case. Instead, its side the drawer slid open by itself. She stood for a moment, hand hovering above the brass tag. It read, Witherbridge Parochial Record, File 1313E, Ecclesiastical Review, denied access, level, unopened, had not been requested in 67 years. Inside, one burned veil, folded 5 times, a wax cylinder, a sketch of a chapel upside-down windows, bricked from the inside. The margins were full of inked-out notations, save for one name, Ellen Murr, and beneath it, a note in Latin. She sings from the bell. Lorette did not blink. She turned the cylinder in her hand. It was labeled in trembling English, "Do not play within chapel walls." The wax had begun to melt at the edges. Her gloves stuck slightly. Still, the player sat nearby, an antique machine, velvet-lined. She placed the cylinder, cranked, and waited. At first, only hiss, then breath, then something like a voice, a child's voice. No, a voice through a child, singing not melody, not language, something between gurgle and chant-like, a hymn being born wrong. The icons in the room seemed to lean, and the veil began to unfurl. It should not have. It was stiffened by ash and age, but the folds loosened, one by one, until it lay flat across the floor like skin pulled clean. In the hem, teeth. 23, threaded, not stitched, some too small, one too large. Lorette backed away. The tape continued. Now, a second voice, lower, breathless, half smothered. They didn't bury her name. They baptized it, and then the bell. It rang only once, but in the room, the wax player stilled, and something answered from the wall. A resonance, not echo. Memory. From beneath the marble tiles came the faintest vibration like hooves or cradles swinging in unison. Lorette's right glove split. The seam at the palm, wax began to drip from her skin. She turned, searching for help, but the archive door had bricked itself. A trick of stonework, they'd said, built during PayPal reconstruction. But the lines were seamless now. Only the veil moved. It began to shift across the floor, dragging toward her in silent, weighted motion. Lorette spoke, just a breath, but the bell answered again, this time from inside the veil. It bulged, something writhed. Beneath the fabric, something long kept. The voice on the tape slowed, then reversed, not rewinding, reliving. She could hear the moor, the milk, the rusted bell, cold even in flame, and behind it, the sleeper, not child, not ghost, not God. Just what's left when you feed ritual too long and silence too sweetly. Lorette grabbed the veil with her bare hand. It hissed. The teeth shifted, pointed inward. Now. Ready to fold. To where? She dropped it. It landed soundlessly. The sketch had moved and now showed the chapel from within. From underneath, the page was wet. She touched it. Milk, sour, still warm. The bell rang again. Not from the cylinder. From inside her. She opened her mouth, and she sang. Not Lorette. Elin. Waking. Elin. Found. Elin. Mouth full of wafer. Him pouring like blood through linen. The veil wrapped her feet. Tight. The wax now ran freely down her arm, shaping itself into script. A list. Children. Unba ptized. Unnamed. unremembered. But not gone. Never gone. Because every time the bell rang, they heard, and one of them woke. Lorette fell to her knees, not in prayer, in receipt. The archive lights dimmed. One icon cracked. A child's voice whispered behind her ear. Not every child is born to be held. Some are born to listen. And then the final line, carved into the cylinder's edge, revealed, now by heat. This record was sealed by the local diocese in 1889. No explanation given. The file resealed itself 3 hours later. All names redacted. Except one, Murr, and the bell was never seen again. But some say if you listen just past Conklin, beneath the floorboards of any forgotten church, she sings. The footage began with breath, cold and unsteady, fogging slightly against the lens. A steady hand tried to hold the camera, but the weight of the moor pulled even that. Stillness downward. Ellen stood at the field's edge, barefoot, her skirt soaked to the knee. The morning was blue with fog, not born from sky or weather, but from somewhere just below the peat. It rose as if summoned, as if her presence had disturbed something ancient that preferred not to be seen in full light. She carried nothing, not the ledger, not the veil, only her breath, and a sound at the back of her throat that might have been humming. No wind, no birds, just the hush of that land which remembered things people were paid to forget, and somewhere beneath it, the bell waited. The camera shook once, then steadied. Behind Ellen, the trees remained still, but the fog coiled toward her heels like fingers. It moved around her as if it knew her shape, curling up her calves, brushing the hem of her dress. She walked. Each footfall was deliberate, but never hesitant, as though she remembered the path, not from maps or stories, but from a deeper place, from somewhere beneath silence. Mud gripped her soles. Pale roots twisted between grass-like veins beneath dead skin. The ground seemed soft, not from rain but rot, centuries of things buried without names, and somewhere far behind, a bell that no longer hung in any tower pulsed once. From under the earth, the fog answered. Elin did not flinch. She stepped over a shorn patch of land, a spiral, faint and moss-bitten, sheep bones scattered at the curve, old, picked clean, but arranged. The moor opened its throat, a hum deeper than sound, a memory, and Ellen's song, if it could be called that, sharpened. It was not melody, it was recall, a hymn with no verses, just tone, just shape. The camera paused on her hands, fingers loose, stained slightly with wax. A single drop clung to the tip of her left index. Trembling, it fell in slow motion onto moss. The fog hissed. Then silence again. She passed an old standing stone, barely visible in the mist, its face etched with something not quite writing. Spirals within spirals, a shallow handprint at the center, not adult-sized. Ellen pressed her palm to it. The fog recoiled. Somewhere off-frame, a chain scraped once, faint and metallic, like an old gate being shut somewhere no longer reachable. The camera panned briefly. A child's bonnet, snagged on bramble, pale, woven, the edge frayed with fine strands of hair, not from a brush or comb, from a head. Ellen did not take it, but she looked long enough for the camera to register her face, blank, not vacant, not afraid, simply absent, as if something else now wore her gaze. She turned back toward the spiral. Fog had formed a circle now, not around her, behind her, encasing where she'd stood, and where she stepped, it cleared, just a little. The ground changed, softer, browner, as if disturbed. She stepped again, and the bell tolled not from a tower, not from metal. From underneath. One low moan of iron, thick with soil. The camera jostled. Somewhere nearby. A gasp, unintended. Whoever held the lens had forgotten to breathe. The bell rang again, shorter, and this time, the peat beneath each feet sank slightly. The earth answered her weight with memory, not mud, flesh. She paused. A handprint rose where she'd stepped, too small for her foot, too wide for a child's. It held, and faded. She reached into her bodice, and withdrew a folded paper, weathered, edged with lace. She tucked it into the soil. No ceremony, just knowing. The paper absorbed quickly, like the ground had been waiting. She stood still. The humming returned, now through her lips. Not breath, echo. The same tonal thread the child had sung on the wax cylinder. The same thread Sister Agnes once wept to in the cloister. The same thread burned into the ledger margins. No one taught it, no one taught it, no one could forget it. She took one last step, and vanished from the lens. Not turned, not faded, gone. Fog collapsed behind her like wings. The moor was whole again. And then the bell, louder this time. From below, the camera tilted, shuddered, fell its final frame. The bonnet, resting upright now, cleaned, threaded through with human hair, woven like prayer. The hum, still audible, even with the camera down, even after the screen went black. And if you listen closely, it doesn't end.